And another tough loss for the Chargers. As we get into the Roto World's player news for all your player news.
Chargers sort of like the Jets West.
Go to NBCSports.com. You are not kidding.
High-scoring Jets West.
They're the inverse, right? Yeah. They can score a ton of points. They don't play any defense. And once again, though, they just make wild mistakes. The Chargers, this is the fourth loss this season by 3 points or fewer. Obviously, that's the most in the NFL. The story of this game, guys, is what the Lions running backs were able to do. Jahmyr Gibbs has 77 yards on 14 carries and 2 touchdowns. David Montgomery has 12 carries for 160 yards and a touchdown.
Jahmyr Gibbs got a couple of bunnies that he pumped in, and then here's David Montgomery with burst.
Oh, yeah.
Breaking through the line.
I mean, this is a great duo right here. And for everybody that wants this backfield to gravitate one way, for the Lions actually winning football games, this is the perfect way to handle it, Jay. And kind of the icing on the cake here is that it also helped to be fantasy friendly if you had either of these guys starting.
Here are their next games: Detroit, Chicago, Green Bay, at New Orleans, at Chicago, Denver, at Minnesota.
They can run the table.
Cupcake schedule. Yeah. This team's going to be like 11-3 going into the last few weeks, and so these guys are going to continue to get run. I mean, it felt like a miracle whenever the Chargers got off the field yesterday, because they got off the field, they forced one punt all day. Other than that, they got one stop at the goal line, and then it was just all touchdowns or field goals for Detroit. I think that was the difference, is that whenever Detroit were on the field, it just felt like they were going to score every single time. With the Chargers, it felt like Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen needed to do amazing things, which they did for the most part. But this Detroit offense, with the offensive line healthier, coming out of the bye, I mean, they're just a force at the moment.
They are, and I don't know that there's a major takeaway from the running backs other than like what we said on Fantasy Football pregame Sunday morning was, hey, you're starting both guys. We have both guys as top 20 plays, and we were wrong because both guys were top 12 plays is what ended up happening here as well. And I think that's going to be continued, like Gibbs over Montgomery, Montgomery over Gibbs. I don't know if you happen to have both guys on your team. I can't imagine you do. But if you do, you're just starting both, and you're looking great. The positives for Gibbs: 4 goal line carries against the Chargers. He had 0 in every single game that Dave Montgomery played prior to this one. So when they were active, they were going to Montgomery, but they got in close, and they were giving it to Gibbs. How much of that is Gibbs was there, he was on the field, Montgomery's first game back, we trust Gibbs more? I don't know. But it feels like it's going to mix and match. I know people want to point to the fact that like 65% of Monty's total yards came on that crazy 75-yard touchdown run, and obviously that's not Dave Montgomery's game, but it's also his first game back. And I do think that like Montgomery will be more involved in the rushing, the in-close rushing, the green zone, the red zone touches as well. So I don't think there's a great takeaway here other than like if you have one of these guys, you're in good shape. You feel good. You're happy.
Yep. And
exciting. Go Lions.
With the pass
One
catches,
pride.
Amon-Ra St. Brown, or Saint as he is known, he was propelled by his appearance on our show to another monster day with 156 yards and a touchdown. But to me, the
ride
story...
or die. He's been a very good ride or die.
Yeah, it's been
when you think about some of the other candidates that were pitched to me.
Tony Pollard, Justin Fields,
Anthony Richardson.
Justin
which
Herbert.
not his fault, but like
I gave you Bijan, which has kind of been.
You gave me Bijan.
Yeah.
Justin Herbert's been up and down.
Yeah, he's quietly getting his numbers, Bijan, but it's not been pretty.
I mean, let me put it this way. I'm very.
You made the right choice.
Yeah.
Despite
Gibbs, by the way, Gibbs was pitched to me as well, and it's coming together now. But like the first 4 or 5.
Yep. Just before we move off this game,
you were pitched.
Keenan Allen, who left the game with an injury midway through, I think in the third quarter, then he comes back. I mean, he's just an absolute monster. 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. His stats on the year, he's been a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, and his stats undersell him because Herbert missed him on a ton of passes against Kansas City and Dallas. So, 40.5 fantasy points for Keenan Allen.
He's been great. I mean, there are a lot of things going in his benefit. First off, he's just a great player, right? So there's that. Plus, because of the injuries early in the season to Austin Eckler, Mike Williams being out for the year, the fact that their defense has been, I'll be kind and just say inconsistent, they've gotten to a lot more shootouts. And so Keenan Allen is really like all they have in many ways. This year, he's got a 31% target share. 31% target share. He's averaging over 8 receptions per game. That's second most in the NFL. He's the only guy. He's the only guy that has multiple games this year with 40 or more fantasy points. Yesterday was one of them as well. Narrowly edging out my guy 8.
The Cowboys duo at 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Before we actually move off of this one, Connor, what do you think of Quentin Johnston yesterday?
I mean, making progress and getting more comfortable in the offense. I think it kind of shows the player that he was drafted to be, where you knew there was going to be time. And to be fair to the Chargers, they took a gamble on the ceiling of Quentin Johnson because they had Mike Williams and Josh Palmer to supplement Keenan Allen. And then you see how quickly the rug kind of gets pulled out from under you, Jay. So with Quentin Johnson, I mean, there's some growing signs at least.
Got in the end zone.
Yeah, he got in the end zone, but overall, it's just he's not. Look at Keenan Allen's volume. Yeah. That kind of tells you everything to know, where they're not leaning on him as a true number 2 yet.
Justin Herbert threw the ball 40 times yesterday, and Quentin Johnson got 4 targets.
Yep.
That's
caught all 4 of them.
He did catch all 4 of them, but
progress.
There's progress. He got less targets than Jalen Guyton.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, you know what I mean? Jalen Guyton had 6 targets. Jalen Guyton, by the way, also got in the end zone, 4 for 41. Jalen Guyton had a better fantasy day than Quentin Johnson, and then we're not going to talk tomorrow about you need to go rush and get Jalen Guyton.
No.
Yeah, I'm still not starting Quentin Johnson. So
It's a fairly narrow. It's Eckler, it's Keenan Allen, it's Justin Herbert. That's what you're starting on the Chargers as well. As long as Parham and Everett are healthy, they're basically canceling each other out.
Let's move over to the Texans against the Bengals. A massive win.
Did we mention how good Amon-Ra St. Brown was?
We did.
Are you sure?
Yeah, top 5 wide receiver finish.
Because he was my fantasy ride or die.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, people that know him call him Saint.
Saint, yeah. Well, he just said people who know him. But he said Amon-Ra. He also, Amon, yeah, everything like that.
Amon-Ra St. Brown.
I just call him my ride or die. I call him a friend of the podcast. And it's just worth noting that in every game that Amon-Ra St. Brown has played, since he's appeared on his podcast, he's averaged over 30 fantasy points per game. He's averaged over 100 receiving yards. He's been a top 3 fantasy wide receiver in every single game that he's played in since appearing on our show.
An improvement for Raheem Mostert's appearance, where 30 minutes after he got off the air with us, they traded for Jeff Wilson.
Yes, that is correct.
Only way is up.
A tough one. All right, looking over at the Texans, who, they beat the Bengals, massive win. The storyline of this game, C.J. Stroud, once again, the first rookie since Cam Newton with 350-plus passing yards in consecutive games. Stroud goes for 356 and a touchdown. He does throw a pick. He also adds a score on the ground here, Jay. Stroud was already a lock on the market for Offensive Rookie of the Year, but now when you look at him, he's trying to show that he's already one of the top young quarterbacks in the AFC.
I mean, he's been a monster. I would call, people are talking about C.J. Stroud for MVP. 3 games ago, he got beaten up by the Panthers.
Yeah, relax.
I don't think he's going to be this guy going forward, but he is incredible. He's having maybe the greatest rookie season of all time by a quarterback. So certainly, he is amazing. And this Bengals defense really is not very good at the moment. Trey Hendrickson's hyperextended his knee. Sam Hubbard was out. So I think, look, there's a few fantasy takeaways from this game, but I think a big one is that the Bengals defense is not scary at the moment.
That's correct. But I'm just curious, moving forward for a second, Texans are now 5-4.
Yeah.
Jacksonville just got their butts kicked by San Francisco. The Colts, okay, whatever. They managed to beat the Patriots, right? And the Titans are done. If the Texans make the playoffs this year, what's a better bet? C.J. Stroud for MVP or DeMeco Ryans for Coach of the Year?
DeMeco for me.
DeMeco for me as well. The thing is with MVP, and this is why I was so against Joe Burrow having such short MVP odds, and he still does, is that it's a full season award. And Stroud has games on his resume. He was 16-24 and did nothing against the Panthers. He did nothing against the Ravens in week 1. It's just we're focusing on these last 2 weeks. Joe Burrow has a 0% chance to win MVP now, just about. Stroud will have his lumps. He will not throw for 350 yards every single game. I think that their award will be Stroud Offensive Rookie of the Year. The thing with Ryans, too, is that he's a defensive coach and they don't have a great defense. It's C.J. Stroud's team to me. And I think ultimately it'll be Dan Campbell or our man Kevin O'Connell for Coach of the Year.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I'm also curious, by the way, who is MVP? Because I have to tell you something. If he wasn't named Patrick Mahomes and you just looked at the numbers,
well, I think your MVP is going to be the winner of that Monday Night Football game next week, which is an epic of Philadelphia at Kansas City. The thing with Mahomes is that you're projecting that he's going to get better the rest of the way because he's Patrick Mahomes. And it's not like his stats are bad. It's just they're not elite, but they should get better as the season goes on. He's got a lot of easy matchups.
He just hasn't been great the last couple of weeks. Mahomes hasn't been. You know what I mean? It's actually been the defense that's bailed him out.
Yep.
Again, we grade Mahomes on a curve because he's Mahomes and he's so brilliant. And so, he gets judged harsher than normal quarterbacks, you know what I mean? But he hasn't been up to Mahomesian levels the last couple of weeks, I guess is the way I would put it.
Yep, Lamar Jackson, not a great day either yesterday. How about Myles Garrett?
Myles Garrett?
Yeah, right?
They
got a 1 seed? I don't know.
AJ Brown still hanging around in there?
But just to finish up this game here, Stroud absolutely terrific. Again, locked in as a QB1 the rest of the way. Like, he's had at least 19 fantasy points in the majority of his games so far this year. He leads the NFL in passing yards per game as well. And he did this all without Nico Collins. To me, I mean, the takeaway is, fine, he had a bad day on the road at Carolina, but when you think about the fact that they play Arizona at home, a Jaguars defense that suddenly doesn't look nearly as scary, then home to Denver. They've got 3 straight home games, and then they're at the Jets, and we'll see what the Jets are like a month from now. But I don't see any reason why C.J. Stroud doesn't continue his run. Tank Dell. I think the biggest 2 takeaways here for me were Devin Singletary and Noah Brown. We always knew Tank Dell was a thing. We liked Noah Brown as a sleeper. We talked about him on Fantasy Football pregame. I tweeted it out when Nico Collins was out, but did I expect him to have a second straight game with over 150 receiving yards? I didn't. Noah Brown is, if they're going to be this pass heavy, Jay.
Yeah.
You're
a big Noah Brown guy, aren't you?
Well, he's overtaken that slot role on a team that is going to run terrifically. And when we get into the waivers tomorrow, I'm sure we're going to mention Noah Brown again. They play Arizona.
Yeah.
They're home to Arizona.
Yep, 5.5-point favorites in that one. Just last thing before we move off, just with the MVP thing, is the best stats of anyone by now in terms of the advanced quarterback stats is Brock Purdy. And he has a stench on him at the moment. If he beats Philadelphia in a couple of weeks in Philly and he beats the Ravens in primetime all of a sudden, I would not write him off. And he's 30-1. And he's on, I think, the best team in football, and he has the best stats.
Yeah. Huge game for Devin Singletary. We'll see if Dameon Pierce comes back here, but this is another one where I don't know that you put that genie back in the bottle. He ran well. Motor Singletary ran like a young Matthew Berry out there. Motor Berry.
That's what everyone's saying.
That's what everyone's saying.
You gotta stop saying
The
that.
volume was just insane.
Well, some people, not me, I'm not saying it, but some people are saying that. But as you see the highlights here, he's running with authority. He's running downhill, as they like to say.
That's what they say.
Motoring downhill.
Yeah, motoring downhill. And again, Arizona, Arizona, next up, it's a really nice run schedule coming up the rest of the way as well. Jacksonville, Denver, yeah. Motor Singletary, back on the legit flex play.
Yep.
If for somebody who has a lot of Dameon Pierce this year, I'm nervous because I don't think he gets the job back even when he comes back. It feels like it'll probably be 65-35 in favor of Singletary after this performance.
It's the first time all season they've run the ball at all, so I don't think they're going to go away from that.
On the Bengals side of it, we kind of sat here and wondered what it would look like with the injuries they've dealt with at wide receiver. A big day for Tyler Boyd. He catches 8 of 12 targets for 117 yards. As you see the Bengals.
But he didn't catch the one that counted.
Yeah, that was it. He loses the touchdown on one he really should have had. Trenton Irwin gets a touchdown in this game. But yeah, you're right, Barry. That separated a good day from him being one of the best wide receivers in fantasy this week if he just catches that touchdown.
Very quietly, he's had over 13 fantasy points now in 3 of the past 4 games. 30% target share with Jamar Chase coming to the game at less than 100%. Chase still had a monster game because, he's Jamar Chase. But it does feel like that should T. Higgins miss their next game, and they play Thursday night against Baltimore. So it's, it's a short turnaround here. You could see a scenario where Boyd gets some run against the Ravens as well if T. Higgins can't make it back for Thursday.
Yeah, and T. Higgins' injury, that's not usually a 10-day thing. But who knows? Maybe he'll get up and play. If he doesn't, then Boyd and Chase, even against that Ravens defense, which doesn't look as fierce as anymore because the Browns move the ball, and we'll get to that. But certainly Jamar Chase is just an absolute monster, even with a bad back, 5 for 124 and a touchdown.
Speaking of that Ravens team, they blow a pretty big lead against the Browns. This is the Browns' first win after trailing by 14-plus points since 2018. Lamar Jackson, not a lot happening for Lamar in this game. Only completed 13 of 23 passes for 223 yards. He has 1 touchdown, throws 2 picks. Obviously, the crushing tipped pick to Greg Newsome towards the end of the game really set this Browns comeback fully in motion. So with Lamar right now, I just got to ask you, Barry, the concern level going forward, he has
massive.
Right? This is now 3 straight weeks of being not Lamar Jackson that we're used to in fantasy, barely even a starting quarterback right now in fantasy.
Yeah, he's had under 15 fantasy points in 3 straight games. To give you an idea of how bad it is, there have been 3 games this year, literally 3, where he's had more than 1 touchdown passes. He's had 3 games this year where he's had more than 1 touchdown pass. He'll always get you the rushing. He gets 41 in this game as well. But you see it there on your screen in terms of 13 fantasy points, 11-5, 12. He had the huge game against the Lions, 17 fine, but then 9.9 against the Steelers. Like in the last 6 games, he's had 1 good game, 1 awesome game, and 4 you gotta be kidding me games, which is just absolutely brutal. Give you a comparison here. Among the quarterbacks with more fantasy points than Lamar Jackson in Week 10, Zach Wilson, Tommy DeVito. I'm just like, you'd have been better off starting Tommy DeVito or Zach Wilson than Lamar Jackson yesterday, which again is crazy. All that said, we just talked about it. They're at home on Thursday night against a Bengals defense that suddenly looks pretty vulnerable, especially if Hendrickson is out.
Yep. And the thing with Lamar, too, you said 1 good game in the past 6 weeks. It's 1 good game all season. That's the only time he's gone off, was that Detroit game where he looked amazing. And he won every mid-season awards, MVP, Colin, because he's Lamar Jackson and the team was rolling. He hasn't been that good this season. And now a lot of that is drops. And if they just caught passes, particularly against Pittsburgh, his stats do look different. But at the same time, it just hasn't really clicked in this Todd Monken offense yet.
They've been playing really great defense, like elite defense. And they're running the ball well, right? And which leads us to the fact, like, hey, Keaton Mitchell, poster boy, Michael Smith's poster boy of fantasy football pregame. We had fun with it just because he's been talking about him for so long. But so shout out to Michael as well. But Keaton Mitchell, look, here's a concern on Keaton Mitchell. Each of the last 2 games, he's had below a 25% snap rate. He's had under 25% of the team rushes. We've seen the big plays. We've seen the explosiveness. But the volume hasn't been there. Like, how sustainable is this production given the workload? But, Connor, the argument is when you produce like this, you earn more playing time.
Exactly. You think the volume goes up. I mean, the fact he had 4 touches in this game, Barry, and he still went over 60 total yards and gets the touchdown, and how explosive he is on an offense that, for as good as the Ravens are this year, there are still things they're really trying to figure out on offense, and having that speed threat, not just screens to Zay Flowers, but having that speed threat out of the backfield is one of them. And every time Keaton Mitchell touches the ball, it feels like everybody pauses, like, what is he going to do now? It feels kind of like a more subtle version of Devon A. when he touches the ball, where you're looking at it and going, like, what is he going to do now?
When he beats guys to the edge, it's all over.
Yeah.
The thing with Lamar, I think, is that he has 4 carries this season inside the 5, and Gus Edwards has 10, and Justice Hill has 3. And it just feels like every time they get in close, they're giving it to those guys, and Lamar's just missing that touchdown equity that can increase his stats.
Maybe it's, I wonder if it's, maybe it's Monken's philosophy. Maybe it's like, hey, listen, we're paying you, whatever, $250 million or whatever it is, his contract is, and they're like, that's why we have Gus Edwards. I mean, and by the way, and in fairness to Gus has been really effective.
That's the thing.
Like, why are we going to risk injury to our franchise when we can, send Gus Edwards in there? On Keaton Mitchell, it does feel like he's kind of surpassed Justice Hill for the RB2 spot on Baltimore, but it feels, and we'll talk more about him tomorrow as well, but it also feels like Gus Edwards is still the main running back that you want on Baltimore, but they've had success running the ball, and they haven't had a ton with Lamar, so it feels like more of the same coming up. I'm still going back to Lamar against Cincinnati, but he is no longer must start. I don't even look at who else I have available to me or who else might be on the waiver wire. Like, he's no longer in that territory. He can't be. Again, he's been bad 4 of the last 6 games. He's not what you drafted him to be, which is mind-boggling.
On the Browns side of things, Amari Cooper, 6 catches, 98 yards, in what was a big second half for Deshaun Watson in this game, Jay. And Jerome Ford, 17 carries. He tops 100 yards as well. So for the guys that you're starting from the Browns offense, they produced.
To me, the big story is 2 big stories. One, Jerome Ford was excellent, and the fact they were able to run the ball against Baltimore's front is very encouraging. But the big thing to me is that Deshaun Watson, even though he statistically wasn't great and he had the bad pick 6, to me he looked athletic, and more athletic than he's looked at any time in his time in Cleveland. He was running even with the ankle, and he just had more zip on the ball. He was trying deep shots. He was ripping 14-yard passes. I thought that Deshaun looked good, and that bodes well for them the rest of the year.
And it bodes specifically well for Amari Cooper, who had another good game with Deshaun Watson under center. When Deshaun Watson's under center, Amari Cooper averages, I think, close to 10 points more than he does without Deshaun Watson. Maybe it's like 8 or 9, but in essence, that's good news for Amari Cooper, who's like a top 15-ish wide receiver as long as Watson's under the center. And then to your point about Ford, 43 touches over the past 2 games. Yes, Kareem Hunt gets into the end zone again, but the Browns running back you want is Jerome Ford.
Moving over to Saints-Vikings. The Vikings have the longest active winning streak in the NFL. That is 5 games. Weeks ago, Barry said, take the long shot odds on Kevin O'Connell, Coach of the Year. That's looking really, really
60-1,
60-1 at the time. Josh Dobbs has had a huge part in this over the last 2 games.
I put $10,000 down on that, too, so I'm feeling really good.
You might not even have to come back to the show next season if you don't feel like it.
100%.
The story of Josh Dobbs continues. I mean, completes 23 of 34 passes, 268 yards, touchdown. The rushing continues to be a thing for him, 44 rushing yards and another rushing touchdown. And his favorite target in this one, while Justin Jefferson works his way back, was T.J. Hockenson. He catches 11 passes, 134 yards, and a touchdown. So just a monster day for the Minnesota offense, and the resurgence this team has had. They lose Kirk Cousins, and the energy Josh Dobbs has brought has made the Vikings a very relevant fantasy offense again.
And there was a report last night talking about how Hockenson and Dobbs worked out in the offseason together. So, like, that they're buddies prior to Dobbs coming to Minnesota. So the fact that, by the way, Hawkinson's also really good.
Yeah,
so, you
that
know,
helps.
and Dobbs is very smart. So it makes sense that he's going to get him here. But yeah, Josh Dobbs enters Monday Night Football as the 3rd best quarterback in fantasy. Over his last 3 games, he's the 5th best quarterback in fantasy. We talked about him on Fantasy Football pregame. We've talked about him a lot since he honestly came onto the scene in like week 2 in Arizona. We're like, because of the rushing, he keeps it up there. And I will tell you this, in our show league, Jay's team is fraudulent.
Yes.
But one of the reasons you've been able to,
Dobby. Dog father.
Yeah, exactly. One of the ways you weasel your way to like 7 wins in our league is thanks to Josh Dobbs.
Yeah, well, we were talking about it beforehand. My team was built around the Pittsburgh Steelers offense, which is terrible, but I've taken on the identity of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Find a
where
way.
I'm in a fraudulent 3-loss team, and it's basically Steelers and Josh Dobbs. And Josh Dobbs is really carrying me at the moment.
I do think Josh Dobbs is not fraudulent, though. At least 40 rushing yards in 4 of the past 5 games and 7 of 10 games this season. The rushing with him is real. It's a pass-friendly offense. That is real. And he's got some weapons in Hockenson and Addison. And oh, by the way,
There's a big
next
fella
week,
coming back. Yeah.
Justin Jefferson should return.
So
That'll help.
Yeah, I think if you have Justin Jefferson, I think you can feel confident. By the way, we talked about the Vikings' upcoming schedule as part of the Kevin O'Connell for Coach of the Year conversation. Like, you have a QB1 on your team. Yeah. Like, I wouldn't be like, I'm just, I'm doing it with smoke and mirrors. Like, Josh Dobbs is a legit QB1 streamer the rest of the way.
Yep, I agree. And to me, when he's throwing to Hockenson, it reminds me of Brock Purdy throwing to Brandon Ayuk, where they just have this chemistry, the touchdown over the middle, over the linebacker before the safety gets there. I think was a good indication of that. But what do you think of Dobbs, Connor? Do you think this is going to last? Or what were his flaws? Like, why has he failed in the past?
Honestly, decision-making early on in his career, even when he played for Tennessee, it just felt like he'd have that bonehead throw or bonehead mistake that was too common that would kind of be a back-breaking play. And it feels like he started to limit those. He's getting more playing time. But the improvising has totally changed his game. The threat of him consistently as a runner has opened things up for him as a scrambling thrower. And now he's in an offense where he's got weapons. And when Justin Jefferson returns, forget it. But he's confident in throwing to Hockenson. We saw, and we'll get into the varied run game here in just a second, Dobbs is a playmaker in a league with a coach that understands how to utilize a playmaker. This isn't just a static drop-back passing offense anymore.
He went to Pittsburgh. Ben Roethlisberger's there. He's obviously kind of offset Roethlisberger. Then he gets traded, I want to say, to Atlanta off the top of my head. He went somewhere else, and then, but then in Tennessee, he gets traded he's got 2 weeks to again, same sort of thing. And that offense wasn't predicated in the way that with Arizona, maybe like it's one thing like, hey, you just got here, and with Tennessee, that was like Josh Dobbs' like first real shot, and the playoffs are on the line, and it's a very conservative offense. Then he goes to Arizona. He was in Cleveland's camp, and they're like, we're going with Deshaun, and we like DTR as a backup, so we'll ship you off to Arizona. Arizona, that's a rebuilding team, and maybe Josh Dobbs is like, F it, man, I'm just going to do what I want here, because it is what it is.
He had them overachieving.
Overachieving, and by the way, that's an offense obviously built around a mobile quarterback in Kyler Murray, and so I don't know, maybe there was just more room to improvise, and we saw oh, okay. And just getting more reps. Josh Dobbs is a baller, man.
Yep, he is. And I think
also a fun follow on TikTok.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah. I think machine. I think a 2 or 3 pick game is going to come at some point just because of the decisions he makes, but the rushing gives you such a high floor, and he is pulling the trigger on these touchdown passes as well.
The Vikings backfield, Alexander Mattison only had 8 carries in this game. He exited in the third quarter with a concussion. Ty Chandler gets a touchdown. So actually a decent day for Ty Chandler on the ground in this one. He had 15 carries for 44 yards. Most importantly, that touchdown. I don't know what you guys think. When Ty Chandler gets opportunities, I actually think he looks pretty explosive.
Looks more explosive than Madison. So.
It makes you wonder why they just completely buried him the first 2 months of the season.
And by the way, the Jets bailed on him too. I
forget his career path.
Connor.
I mean, once again, not an opportunity. So.
Well, listen, he's going to get an opportunity now. We'll see if Madison can clear the concussion protocol. But prior to Alexander going out, Chandler was playing 35% of the snaps. He had 35% of the team's rushes. We'll talk about him more tomorrow during the waiver wire, but he'll be a popular pickup, especially, obviously, if Madison can't go when the Vikings play Denver right here on Sunday Night Football. On NBC and Peacock. I'm a company man.
Actually, a compelling game now. Jefferson.
Jefferson's return, Josh Dobbs, and we'll see what happens.
Broncos are competent again.
I don't think this is a given that Buffalo wins this game tonight. Denver out of the bye, they've looked better the last couple of weeks. Buffalo has some issues. I have earlier in the week I was able to grab Denver plus 7.5, which I like quite a bit.
Yeah, now it's down to 7.
Yes.
Yep.
On the other side of this game with the Saints, Derek Carr unfortunately gets carted off in the third quarter with the right shoulder injury. But Chris Olave's day salvaged by Jameis Winston coming in and looking like Buck's 30 interception version of Jameis Winston. 88% of Olave's production in this game came when Jameis came into the game. He's just out there chucking it, Jay.
The thing there is the average depth of target with Jameis. He throws it down the field. Chris Olave loves to get down the field, and it seemed like they had a really good connection. This is the best game from Chris Olave in a while. Michael Thomas gets hurt as well, which helps Chris Olave's target share.
This year, when Jameis Winston's been under center, Chris Olave has a 35% target share compared with just 25% for Derek Carr. And to your point, there is a bit of YOLO to Jameis Winston's game that isn't there with Derek Carr. Now, they're on a bye next week, so we'll see if Carr comes out healthy 2 weeks from now when the Saints return to play the Falcons. But I will tell you that, again, you never root for injury. You won't. But if you are a Chris Olave manager, you're hoping they make a change at quarterback for whatever reason and that Winston is under center because Olave has been better fantasy-wise with famous Jameis.
Our final game here, Falcons-Cardinals. The Falcons have lost 3 straight games combined by 10 points. Shout out to Lawrence Jackson. He gave out...
Lawrence Jackson.
Lawrence Moneyline Jackson.
Yeah, Lawrence Moneyline Jackson.
Gave out Cardinals Moneyline
Yes,
in this one on Wednesday when we do our line alerts here. And Kyler Murray comes through. Kyler Murray's return, 19 completions, 249 yards. He throws the pick, but he also has 6 carries for 33 yards. And really aids Trey McBride in the pass game, Jay.
I think the key is just that he looked exactly like Kyler Murray.
Guy.
He looked super explosive. He was not afraid to rush the ball. He gets in the end zone for a touchdown. Early drive, he goes for a big run. So I think that he is just all the way back, and you just treat him like he's the Kyler Murray of years past, who was, in previous years, a top 4 fantasy quarterback.
We've been talking about him for a while, just saying, hey, he's going to come back. This is a guy that's averaged over 20 fantasy points per game throughout his career, including all of last year. Now, I'll say, I had him on the hate list this week because I was just I want to see it first. I had him at QB 15. He goes into Monday Night Football as QB 11. If Allen and Wilson have big games tonight, he'll be QB 13 and all right, pretty close there. But like I said, I wanted to see it first before I was willing to just risk him immediately going into my lineup. Well, we saw it. And Jay, you're 100% right. He looked like Kyler Murray. 54% of his fantasy points came from the rushing, which has always been a big part of his game, NFL-wise and fantasy-wise. And there was no hesitation with him. He was willing to just immediately duck and run, and that was one of the concerns is off the ACL. He hasn't played in almost a year. Will he have concerns and try to be limited in his rushing? Not at all.
No.
He was Kyler.
On the other side of this for the Falcons, we get what we begged Arthur Smith for.
Trey McBride, by the way, I know you mentioned him quickly, but Trey McBride, I just want to mention this sentence. There's the only tight ends that have had multiple games with at least 8 receptions and 90 yards this year. Travis Kelce and Trey McBride. He's in that top 5 conversation, right? I mean, in terms of Trey McBride. Again, without Zach Ertz, he's just a total funnel in terms of targets. Tough game for Hollywood Brown. Hopefully better days ahead for him. I thought he would have a better day than he did.
And that's what McBride was at Colorado State. He was their offense. I always say this. For a tight end to be the offense in college is insane. It's weird how long it took for Arizona to lean on him.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we're here. Not because Zach Ertz got hurt, but glad for McBride.
This is legit. Trey McBride
Very
is legit.
He's a really good pass catcher. On the Falcons side, Bijan Robinson gets 22 carries, 95 yards. He gets a touchdown. I just worry, guys, since the Falcons lost this game, does Arthur Smith now get his
Back
way?
to 11 carries for Bijan
and
next
go
week?
back to Jonnu Smith, 4 carries, and Desmond Ridder's going to start a quarterback, and on and on and on the cycle goes.
I don't know. It's insane. I mean, they're on a bye next week, so we'll see. But here the positives are he got 2 goal line carries. Algier still got some too, but he did get 2 goal line carries. Weeks 1 through 9, he had 2 total goal line carries. So he doubles his season total. I mean, it's all mind-boggling. Like I'm happy the Falcons lost because obviously I'm anti-Arthur Smith here, but I'm glad Bijan.
Their misery.
I'm glad Bijan played well with over 100 total yards, 23 touches. When he gets work, he's had 6 games with 15 or more touches this year. He's averaging over 17 fantasy points per game in those games. When he gets work, he's good. Arthur Smith. Anyway, the reason they lost that game is because of Arthur Smith. This is what I believe happened, though. For those listening, it's a tweet. While Arthur Smith wasn't looking, Bijan Robinson snuck onto the field and easily scored a rushing touchdown. Parentheses, I'm assuming that's how that happened. It doesn't make sense otherwise. I can't imagine Arthur Smith said, get in there.
Never again.
I just assume Bijan did one of these, like, Coach, what's that? And then Coach looked around and, and they're like,
He probably went, Coach, what happened to Jonnu Smith? And Arthur went like,
what? Wait,
sprinted
what's
down the sideline.
what's our goal to go play now? And then next thing you know, it was there, and then they scored, and
Oh boy.
whole thing.
I mean,
It's
if he gets 17 carries a game, he's the top 5 running back in fantasy.
right, which is what you drafted him to be.
talent
But
there.
we just don't know. So back to the drawing board for the Falcons again. They are on a bye, but then they come back and play the Saints, the Jets, the Bucks, and the Panthers. So a lot of NFC South action.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens with Desmond Ritter and Taylor Heineke, with Heineke being injured.
Yeah,
don't
I think
it
you're rooting
changes
for
a ton.
Heineke.
Let's take a look at the injuries we're tracking.
Yes,
Notable
this is one
Week
of them.
10 injuries. Derek Carr, the shoulder, concussion. Deshaun Watson dealing with a lower body injury. Alexander Madison has the concussion. Michael Thomas with the knee. Taylor Heineke with a hamstring injury. Gerald Everett has a back injury. And Jalen Hyatt left the game for concussion protocol as well. So some key ones that we will track on the Fantasy Football Happy Hour throughout the week.
Yeah. A lot of people are saying that when Hyatt left the game, that was why DeVito struggled.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah.
That's
No
when the
deep
Cowboys
threat.
really ran away.
Right.
With it.
It was a game, and then unfortunately they lose Hyatt to the concussion, and then just didn't seem like they had a plan.
16.5-point spread, a real sweat. We're going to our first break when we're back.
That was my bet on Wednesday, by the way.
Yes, it was.
I said that's
This is
way too low.
Weekend
Way too
Warriors,
low.
Sunday
It closed
Scaries.
at 17.5, and
Right after
they
this.
doubled that.